So tonight finally we return to what is probably my favourite all-time genre, subgenre, whatever you want to call it, the military paranormal US Marines on a base. I don't even know what to call this. Anyway, you know exactly what I mean, what I'm talking about here. So yeah, there are US Marines, there's all kinds of weird things going on, and we bear witness to it. So this one's a little bit special. It's one that I really, really want to share with you right now. So I'm going to do it. Okay, so without further ado, my dear, dear friends, buckle up for this one. It's pretty damn good. So here we go with The Weird Things I Witnessed at Camp Lejeune by Margot Holloway. Well, I shouldn't be sharing this. If they find out, I'll be in trouble. Worse than trouble. But after everything I've heard, after speaking with these men, seeing the fear still lingering in their eyes, I can't keep it to myself. Oh, these are stories the military doesn't want out. Events scrubbed from reports, buried under classified stamps, dismissed as heat exhaustion or sleep deprivation. But the men who lived through them, they know what they saw. 3 different Marines, 3 separate incidents. Many more to come, maybe. All at 29 Palms. And each of them left with the same hollow, haunted look, like something had followed them back, something they couldn't shake. They didn't want to talk at first. First Marine laughed bitterly and said I wouldn't believe him. The second one kept looking over his shoulder, as if someone was listening. The third hesitated the longest before speaking, like saying it out loud would make it real again. But they did talk, and now I'm passing it on to you. If I disappear after this, you'll know why. So listen carefully, and if you're ever stationed at 29 Palms, stay out of the desert at night. Entry 1. Shadows in the Sand. Well, they say the desert has a way of humbling you, stripping away any pretense until all that's left is the raw, unvarnished truth of who you are. That's what 29 Palms Marine Corps Base is like. A place where the landscape doesn't just surround you, it consumes you. And by day, the base is an expanse of beige and brown, stretching endlessly under a sky so wide it feels oppressive. The heat is merciless, rising in shimmering waves off the sand, making everything in the distance look like it's rippling or melting. The air smells of dust and sunburnt metal, a scent that clings to your uniform and your skin. Out in the field, the heat sucks the moisture straight out of you, leaving your mouth dry no matter how much water you drink. Well, at night, though, the desert transforms. The temperature plummets and the world becomes eerily still. The wind kicks up occasionally, but it doesn't sound like the wind. It's more like a whisper, as if the sand itself is telling you secrets you're not meant to hear. The moon casts an icy light over the base, illuminating the stark, jagged outlines of the surrounding mountains and the skeletal remains of long, dead Joshua trees. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, flickering and shifting even when nothing's moving. The barracks are basic and cramped, their walls thin enough to let in every sound. The rhythmic creak of someone's bunk, the low hum of distant generators. Sometimes, if you're unlucky, the echo of boots on the concrete floors when nobody's supposed to be walking. Oh, there's a persistent hum of unease here, a feeling you can't shake no matter how many hours you spend training or how exhausted you are by the end of the day. It's not just the isolation, although being surrounded by miles of nothingness doesn't help. Oh, it's something deeper, something ingrained in the land itself. Well, the older guys say the area was once sacred ground to the local tribes, a place where spirits walk freely and the boundary between the living and the dead blurred. Then the military moved in, bulldozing over history to make way for training ranges and bunkers. Add to that decades of unexplored ordnance buried in the sand and the occasional whispers about classified experiments conducted during World War II, and you've got a place where no one feels entirely at ease. Well, the ghost stories don't help either. Every barracks has them. Some guys swear they've seen shadowy figures pacing the hallways at night or heard whispers coming from empty rooms. Others talk about soldiers disappearing during training exercises, their names scrubbed from the records like they were never there. Most of us laugh it off, chalking it up to the stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, no one really wants to be out there alone after dark. Well, I've always been the skeptical type, the kind of guy who rolls his eyes at spooky campfire tales. But 29 Palms has a way of getting under your skin, and after a while even the most rational mind starts to wonder, what if the stories are true? What if there's something out there in the desert watching, waiting? Well, I didn't believe in any of it. Until that night. Routine. That's what they called it. Just another perimeter patrol. A slow trek along the edge of nowhere to make sure nobody and nothing was out there. Most nights it was just a few hours of boredom under the stars, broken only by the occasional chatter on the radio or the distant yip of a coyote. But this night felt different from the start. We were a team of 4, spread out just enough to keep our eyes on each other without losing the thread of the conversation. The air was colder than usual, biting through my uniform in a way that made me shiver despite the layers. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of boots on sand and the faint metallic clink of our gear. Even the coyotes seemed to have gone quiet, as if the desert itself was holding its breath for something. Out here, you rely on your flashlight as much as your instincts. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off rocks and sparse vegetation. But beyond that small circle of light was a void. The desert at night isn't just dark, it's absolute. And it swallows you whole, making you feel like the only thing standing between the emptiness and oblivion. About an hour into the patrol, I noticed something strange. Off in the distance, low on the horizon, there was a flicker of light. Well, at first, I thought it could be a campfire, some hikers or locals who'd wandered too close to the base. But the way it moved didn't seem right. It was faint, like the glow of a match, and it seemed to hover just above the ground, pulsing in and out like it was alive. Hey, you see that? I asked, pointing it out to the guy nearest to me. He squinted, his flashlight sweeping over the area I was pointing to. See what? That light over there, near those rocks. Well, he shook his head. You're imagining things. Probably heat shimmer or something. But it wasn't heat shimmer, and I knew it. I mean, the temperature had dropped too much for that. Still, I let it go, chalking it up to tired eyes and the tricks they play in the dark. As we kept moving, the lights appeared again, this time on the opposite side of our path. Well, it was subtle, like the faint glow of embers just out of reach. Whenever I tried to focus on them, they vanished, slipping away like smoke on the wind. Well, I mentioned it again, but this time no one else could see it. They laughed it off, called me jumpy. Maybe they were right. Maybe the stories I'd dismissed so easily were starting to worm their way into my head. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The lights weren't just random flares or tricks of the eye. They seemed deliberate, intentional, like they wanted to be seen, but only by me. By the time we finished the patrol and headed back to the base, the lights were gone, leaving nothing but questions in their place. I didn't say anything else to the others, but the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Well, whatever those lights were, they weren't natural. And somehow I knew this was only the beginning. Well, the lights returned on the next patrol. This time they weren't just faint flickers on the horizon. No, they seemed closer, brighter, and more persistent, as if daring us to investigate. I pointed them out again, and this time the others saw them too. Probably hikers or some kids messing around, one of the guys said, his voice tinged with annoyance. Yeah, they'll clear out when they see us coming. We made our way toward the lights, moving carefully over the uneven terrain. The desert has a way of hiding its dangers in plain sight. Loose rocks, sudden dips, and the occasional rattlesnake. Every step felt heavier than the last, and the air itself was thickening around us. And the closer we got, the more the lights seemed to shift, as if they were dancing just out of reach. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished, leaving us standing in the middle of the empty desert with nothing but the sound of the wind. But it wasn't just the wind. Well, at first it was barely audible, like a faint rustling that could have been the breeze moving through the scrub. But as I stood there, straining to listen, the sound became clearer. Whispers, low and rhythmic. They seemed to rise and fall with the wind, forming words I couldn't understand. "Hey, you hear that?" I asked, my own voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" one of the others replied, scanning the area with his flashlight. "The wind. It's whispering." He snorted. "It's just the wind, man. You're letting this place get to you." But it wasn't just the wind, and I knew that. The whispers carried an unnatural weight. Each word, if they were words, was hitting me like a stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. And they weren't loud, but they were insistent, weaving through the silence like a thread pulling everything tighter. Well, the others shrugged it off, laughing and joking to dispel the tension. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That night, after we returned to the barracks, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those lights flickering in the darkness, heard those whispers riding the wind. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't to rest. I dreamed of shadowy figures standing over my bunk. They were tall and thin, their silhouettes sharp against the dim glow of the barracks' emergency lights. Their faces, if they had faces, were impossible to see, shrouded in shadow like they were being deliberately hidden. They didn't speak, but their presence was overwhelming, filling the room with a suffocating pressure. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like they were pressing down on me, their unseen eyes boring into my very soul. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The barracks were quiet. The only sound, the soft snoring of the other guys. But the feeling of being watched lingered, as if the figures from my dream were still there, just out of sight. I didn't sleep again the rest of the night, and when morning came, I knew that whatever was out there in the desert wasn't done with me yet. Solo watch was the kind of duty no one wanted. Sitting alone at a remote post, hours stretching endlessly before you with nothing but your thoughts and the dark to keep you company. But out here, assignments weren't about what you wanted. They were about what needed to be done. The post was a small makeshift station on the far edge of the base, barely more than a shack with a chair and table, and a radio that seemed older than I was. Outside, the desert sprawled endlessly in every direction, the sharp outlines of cacti and jagged rocks casting shadows under the pale moonlight. The first few hours passed uneventfully, though the silence pressed on me harder with every passing minute. There was a strange stillness in the air, the kind that made you hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the chair, every distant rustle of sand, every faint breeze slipping through the cracks in the shack's walls. And then I started seeing them. At first it was just a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision, a shadow slipping behind a boulder or darting between the cacti. I told myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks on me. But the more I stared into the darkness, the more certain I became that something was out there. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cool night air prickling my skin. The beam cut through the dark, sweeping over the landscape in slow, deliberate arcs. Well, there was nothing but rocks, sand, and the skeletal shapes of desert plants. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I moved cautiously, following the faint impressions in the sand that seemed to lead away from the post. The prints weren't like anything I'd seen before. Not boot tracks, not animal prints. They were strange, almost human but elongated, with deep grooves as if claws had dragged through the earth. As I knelt to examine the disturbed sand, the radio on my hip crackled to life. At first it was just static, faint and intermittent, but then a voice broke through. Well, it was distorted, warped by the interference, but unmistakable in one chilling detail. It was my name. Jones. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. The voice was faint, almost a whisper, but it was there. Jones, come closer. My hand tightened around the radio, my pulse roaring in my ears. This is Watch Post Bravo. Who's on the comms? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked on the last word. The static answered me, hissing and popping like a living thing. Then the voice came again, clearer this time, but still wrong. Jones, it's safe. Come closer. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping over the empty desert. The post stood behind me, its solitary silhouette stark against the horizon. The whispers from the radio faded into nothing, but the silence that replaced them was worse. Heavy and oppressive, like the air before a storm. Something was out there. Something was playing with me, and for the first time I truly felt alone. I backed toward the post, keeping the flashlight trained on the darkness as if that thin beam could hold back whatever was watching me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tension and half-glimpsed shadows, with my radio eerily silent. When my relief finally arrived at dawn, I didn't say a word about what had happened. What could I say? That the desert had whispered my name? That shadows had stalked me through the night? No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. But as I handed over the watch and trudged back to the barracks, one thing was clear. Whatever was out there wasn't just watching me. It was waiting. The whispers, the lights, the shadows, it was all becoming too much to ignore. Whatever was happening out there wasn't just in my head. There was something about this place. Something wrong. I needed answers. During my next off-duty hours, I found myself at the base library. It wasn't much, just a small dusty room tucked away in one of the older buildings. But it had shelves of records, old maps, and even a few books about local history. I started with the maps, tracing the outlines of 29 Palms and the surrounding desert. Most of it was what I was expecting. Barren land crisscrossed with training areas and old bombing ranges. But the older maps told a different story. Before the base, before the roads and the barracks, this land had belonged to someone else. The librarian, a wiry older man with glasses perched precariously on his nose, noticed my interest. Looking for something in particular?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm just curious about the history of the base," I said, trying to keep it casual. He gave me a long, considering look before nodding. "You won't find all of it in there," he said, gesturing to the maps. "But there are stories, old ones. You hear things working here long enough." I leaned in. "What kind of things?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "This land used to belong to the Chemehuevi and Serrano tribes. Sacred ground, they say. Places of power where the veil between this world and the next is thinner." He glanced around as if making sure no one was listening. "Then the military came in during the war, took the land, turned it into what you see now." "What happened to the tribes?" I asked. He shook his head. "Displaced. Some say cursed, but that's just talk. What's not talk are the experiments they did here during the war. Things they don't put in the history books. Chemical weapons, radiation testing, psychological experiments. Men went into those ranges and never came out." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What about now? Do people still see things?" He gave me a knowing look. "Depends on who you ask. Some say they've seen figures wandering near the old bombing ranges. Others hear voices at night, like whispers carried on the wind. Then they're the ones who just disappear." I spent the rest of the evening combing through what little I could find. Reports of missing soldiers during training exercises, unexplained deaths, and the occasional rumor of ghostly apparitions. One account, dated back to the 1940s, described soldiers seeing dancing lights in the distance, only to vanish when approached. Another told of a patrol that never returned, their tracks leading into the desert and ending abruptly, as if they'd been swallowed by the sand. By the time I left the library, the sun was setting. The dry, dusty wind tugged at my uniform, and for the first time I truly felt the weight of the history beneath my feet. This land wasn't just desolate, it was haunted, both by its past and whatever still lingered here. And now I was caught in its grip, tangled in a web of whispers and shadows that I couldn't escape. Well, the more I learned, the clearer it became. I wasn't the first to see the lights or hear the whispers, but I might not be as lucky as those who'd simply disappeared. Patrols had become routine by now, a blur of footsteps in the sand and tension simmering beneath the surface. We all felt it, an unspoken unease that hung in the air, thick as the desert heat. This time, though, something was different. We were walking in a sector near the edge of the old bombing ranges, an area long since declared off-limits. It wasn't unusual to find scattered debris, twisted metal, fragments of old training equipment. But tonight something caught our eye. A jagged structure jutting out of the sand. "What the hell is that?" one of the guys muttered, pointing his flashlight at the object. We approached cautiously, brushing away layers of sand to reveal a rusted steel door set into the ground. It was an old bunker, partially buried by decades of desert storms. "Think it's safe to go in?" someone asked. "Safe? Probably not," I replied. "But we've come this far." The door groaned on its hinges as we forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air inside was stale and heavy, carrying the faint scent of decay. Flashlights swept across the walls as we made our way down, revealing faded markings. At first, they looked like standard graffiti, names, dates, crude drawings. But deeper inside, the symbols changed. They became intricate, almost artistic, resembling Native American pictographs, but with a distinctly unnatural edge. Lines twisted and spiraled into shapes that defied logic, patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "What is this place?" one of the guys whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't think I want to know," another replied. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the air. It was the feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking just beyond the edge of the light. We reached the end of the corridor, a small room with walls covered in the strange symbols. God, it was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. "Let's get out of here," someone said, their voice trembling. But then, one of the team members, Martinez, froze. His flashlight flickered, and he started to back away, his face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked him, stepping toward him. He pointed shakily to the far corner of the room. There's someone there." We all turned, shining our flashlights toward the corner. At first, there was nothing, just shadows playing tricks on the walls. But then I saw it. A figure barely more than a silhouette, standing impossibly still. Its shape was humanoid, but, well, wrong. The edges of its body seemed to blur and ripple as if it wasn't fully there. And then it moved. It didn't step or lunge, it simply shifted, flickering closer like a broken image skipping frames. Its eyes glowed faintly, a pale unnatural light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Martinez screamed and bolted for the stairs, his panic infectious. The rest of us followed, scrambling out of the bunker and slamming the door shut behind us. Outside, we stood in the open desert, gasping for air. Martinez was shaking, muttering to himself about what he'd seen. You all saw it, right? He finally asked, his voice cracking. Tell me you saw it. Well, I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. Whatever was in that bunker, it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could explain, and the worst part? As we stood there trying to convince ourselves it was over, I felt it again. That same oppressive presence, lingering in the air like a storm waiting to break. We weren't alone, and we never had been. The days after the bunker incident were a blur of unease and exhaustion. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by dreams, or maybe memories, of glowing eyes and shadowy figures. Even in the daylight, the desert seemed darker, the sun unable to pierce the gloom that had settled over me. I started seeing them everywhere. At first, it was just flickers at the edge of my vision, shapes that disappeared the moment I turned to look. But as the days wore on, they grew bolder. I catch glimpses of them in the reflection of a window or standing motionless in the far distance, watching. Always watching. By the time my next patrol rolled around, I was already on edge. The unease was no longer a dull hum in the back of my mind. It was a drumbeat now, relentless and deafening. We were assigned to sweep a section of the base perimeter that had always felt unnervingly empty. Even the usual desert sounds, distant coyote howls, the chirping of insects, were absent. The first sign of trouble came as we reached the halfway point of the patrol. The radio crackled with static, loud and sudden, making everyone jump. HQ, this is patrol team, I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. We're getting interference. Do you copy? No. Response. One of the guys tapped his headset. Damn, the thing's dead. A moment later, the lights on our vehicles flickered. Headlights, dashboard displays, even the flashlight beams, all of them dimmed and pulsed like a dying heartbeat. What the hell's going on? Someone muttered, panic creeping into their voice. And that's when we saw them. At first, they were just shapes against the darkness, but as the lights sputtered, the figures became clearer. There were dozens of them, maybe more, standing just beyond the edge of our patrol. Their forms were human-like, but their movements were wrong, jagged and stilted, as if the air itself resisted their presence. And then, they began to move in. Everyone stay calm, I shouted, though I barely believed my own words. But calm was impossible. The figures were too close now, their faces, or rather the absence of them, fully visible. They were shadows given form, their bodies rippling like smoke, and their eyes. God, their eyes. They glowed with the same faint, pale light I'd seen in the bunker, but now it was more intense, more alive. Back to the vehicles, someone yelled. We stumbled toward the trucks, but the figures moved faster, circling us. My heart pounded as I raised my rifle, though I knew deep down it was useless. Then I heard it. A voice, clear and commanding, but not spoken aloud. It was in my head, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Leave this place. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, as the low voice repeated itself, louder and more insistent. Around me, the others were frozen, their faces pale with terror. Leave now. The figures stopped their advance, standing motionless as if waiting for us to obey. The voice faded, leaving only the pounding of my heart in the deafening silence. Move, I shouted, snapping out of the trance. We scrambled into the vehicles, engines roaring to life despite the flickering lights. As we sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figures were still there, standing in the distance, their glowing eyes following us until the desert swallowed them whole. I woke up to the sterile smell of antiseptic, my body stiff and heavy. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or how I got there. The blinding white lights overhead seemed too harsh, like they were trying to burn their way into my brain. My head throbbed and I instinctively reached up to touch it, wincing at the bandages wrapped around my skull. "Easy there, Marine," a voice said softly. I turned to see a nurse standing beside my bed, her face kind but distant. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry. "You were found unconscious in the desert about 5 miles off your patrol route," she said. "It's a miracle someone found you." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. The last thing I'd remembered was the shadows closing in, the voice of the desert. I tried to sit up, but dizziness swamped me, and I fell back against the pillow. "The others, my team." "Well, they're fine. They've been released, but they're not talking. I'm afraid you'll have to speak to your commanding officer about what happened next." Her words didn't make sense. There's no way my team was fine. We'd all seen it, the figures, the voices. But something in her eyes told me she didn't want to know any more than I did. I spent the next few days in the infirmary, a blur of nurses coming and going, and officers asking me the same questions over and over. What happened out there? Where did you go? But I had no answers. My memories were fragmented, full of holes. I couldn't remember how I'd ended up alone in the desert, or what had happened to my teammates. Well, they wouldn't look me in the eye. Whenever I asked them what had happened, they'd just turn away, their faces pale, their lips sealed tight. Well, the military did what they always do when things like this happen. They swept it under the rug. No investigation, no explanation, just a discharge. Psychological stress, they said. Post-traumatic stress disorder. They said it like it was some simple thing, like I'd just snapped. Like the desert and whatever haunted it was just a figment of my imagination. They sent me home, back to civilian life, as if that could erase the memories of what I'd seen. But it didn't stop. I can't escape it. I still see them. I see the shadows in the corner of my vision, even in broad daylight. I see them in the reflections of windows, in mirrors, in darkened hallways. They're always there, waiting, watching. They haven't left me. And every time I close my eyes, I feel their presence. In my dreams, they're closer than before, their glowing eyes burning through the darkness. They whisper my name, and I know it's only a matter of time before they come for me again. I've tried to ignore them. I've tried to go back to a normal life, to pretend like I'm free. But I know the truth now. There's no escaping it. No matter where I go, they will always be with me, watching and waiting. I can't help but wonder. What happens when they get too close? Entry 2. The Strange Call. 29 Palms is like an ocean of sand, a place where the desert swallows everything. Light, sound, even time. The heat warps the air in shimmering waves during the day, and at night the temperature drops so fast it feels like the desert itself is breathing. Out here, under an open sky too vast to comprehend, things don't always behave the way they should. One of the first things you learn at the base is how sound carries. It moves in strange, unpredictable ways. A whispered conversation 100 yards away can reach you as clearly as if the speaker was standing right next to you, while a shout at close range might get eaten up by the wind before it reaches another set of ears. It messes with your head if you let it. But there's something else about the sounds here. Something that isn't just an illusion of distance or the tricks of the wind. Well, some Marines say they've heard it. Their own voices calling out to them from the dunes. Well, the first time I heard the rumor, I laughed it off. Just another campfire story, like the ones about ghostly lights in the mountains or whispers in the abandoned barracks. But the longer I stayed at 29 Palms, the more I realized that everyone had a story. Some said it only happened late at night, in the dead hours when the desert stretched on forever and the sky pressed down heavy. Others swore it could happen any time, just a faint echo of yourself, calling your name, always just out of sight. Most of the guys dismissed it as the wind, or sleep deprivation, or plain old paranoia. A handful believed it was something worse. Me, I didn't believe it at all. At least not until the night I heard my own voice calling from the dark. Desert training is all about endurance, pushing through exhaustion, disorientation, and the creeping paranoia that sets in when the land around you refuses to change. At night, the sand stretches endlessly in all directions, a flattened, featureless wasteland under the cold light of the stars. Well, that night we were sent out for a land navigation exercise in one of the most remote sections of the base. No GPS, no modern tech, just maps, compasses, and our own instincts. The goal was simple: cover a set distance in teams, mark waypoints, and regroup at a designated location by dawn. I was in a 4-man team, but we had to fan out to cover more ground. No big deal, just a mile or two between us at most, keeping in contact over the radio. At least, that was the plan. Not long after we separated, something shifted in the atmosphere. Well, the usual sounds of the desert, crickets, the distant bark of a coyote, even the whisper of the wind through the dunes. Well, it just stopped. It wasn't silence exactly, no, it was more like the world had been put on mute. Then the radio started acting up. Static crackled in my earpiece. Bursts of noise that didn't form words but sounded just close enough to human speech to make my skin crawl. I tapped the receiver, muttered a curse, and tried again. Bravo team, radio check. Nothing. I stopped walking and turned in a slow circle, scanning the dark horizon for the glow of a flashlight or the silhouette of one of my teammates. And that's when I heard it. Hey. A voice clear and sharp in the silence, coming from somewhere in the dunes behind me. My voice? Yeah, come here. It was unmistakable. Same tone, same cadence. If I hadn't known better, I would have sworn I'd just spoken out loud. But my mouth hadn't moved. I swallowed hard and turned in the direction of the sound. The dunes rolled out before me, untouched and undisturbed. There was nothing there. Then it spoke again. This way. The voice was farther now, pulling me toward the darkness beyond the hills of sand. Well, every rational thought told me to turn back, but my legs had other ideas. And so, I stepped forward. I hesitated, my heart pounding against my ribs. It had to be a trick, one of my squad mates messing with me. Maybe someone had circled back and was hiding behind a dune, trying to rattle my nerves. Yeah, very funny, guys, I called out. My voice echoed slightly, bouncing off the landscape. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Very funny, guys. It was my voice, but something was wrong. It wasn't just an echo. The words came back slightly slower, stretched like a recording played a fraction of a second too late. The inflection was off, like whoever or whatever was speaking was trying to mimic me, but didn't quite understand how human speech worked. I felt a sudden chill, despite the dry desert heat still lingering in the sand. "Who's out there?" I demanded. "Who's out there?" the voice repeated, but this time it was closer. A burst of static exploded in my earpiece, making me wince, and then, "Bravo team, does anyone copy?" It was Davis, one of the other guys in the exercise. His voice was tight, on edge. I pressed my radio's transmit button. "I copy. Hey, something weird's going on." More static. Then another voice cut in. "Same here," said Jackson. heard myself, talking in the dunes. Sounded, a pause. Sounded wrong. Davis came back. We need to regroup. Now, this isn't a... His voice cut off. Then from behind me, out in the darkness, we need to regroup. Now, this isn't... The exact same words, but distorted, drawn out. My blood ran cold. I turned my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam was swallowed by the dunes, illuminating only sand and shadows. My fingers tightened around my rifle. All across the exercise area, other voices began to call out, sometimes our own, sometimes each other's, always repeating, always slightly off. We'd trained for enemy combatants, ambush scenarios, even total radio silence, but nothing in our manuals had prepared us for this. Some of the guys broke formation, heading into the dunes to search for whoever or whatever was mimicking us. They never found anything. At least, haven't yet. We spread out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The desert was vast and unyielding, swallowing sound and light in a way that made everything feel stretched, further away than it really was. "Lewis," I called. "Lewis," echoed back, but not from any of my teammates. It came from somewhere deeper in the dunes, warped and hollow, like my voice had been stripped of all warmth. Davis swore under his breath. This isn't right. None of it was. Lewis had been with us minutes ago, and then he was gone. One second he was at my side, sweeping his flashlight over the sand, and the next he'd stepped away, following a voice calling his name, and then just disappeared. No one had seen where he'd gone. No footprints, no radio contact, just gone. We searched for hours. The desert had a way of playing tricks on you, especially at night, but this wasn't just disorientation. We weren't just lost. We were being toyed with. Every time we shouted Lewis's name, the desert answered back, but never in his voice, always in ours. And then... "Over here." Jackson had spotted movement near a rock formation. We ran toward it, weapons ready, expecting the worst. Lewis just stood there, motionless. His flashlight hung limply in his grip, casting a weak beam onto the sand. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Jesus, man," Davis breathed, lowering his rifle. "Where the hell were you?" Lewis didn't answer at first. He just stared at us, at each of us, like he wasn't sure if we were real. Then, finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "He was out there with me." "What was?" I asked. He swallowed hard. I don't know." His voice was trembling. "I heard you guys calling, but when I answered, He shook his head. It spoke at the same time I did. Breathed when I breathed. Every time I moved, it moved, but I never saw it. A long silence fell between us. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, indifferent to our fear. And then, far off in the dunes, "It was out there with me." Lewis's exact words repeated back to us. But this time the voice wasn't his. It was mine. The desert stretched out before us, silent and endless. The wind had died down, leaving only the occasional shifting of sand as our soundtrack. I stood watch with Davis and Jackson while the others caught what little rest they could. Night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green, distorting the landscape into a grainy alien wasteland. "Keep your eyes on the ridgeline," I murmured. That was where things liked to appear. And sure enough, something did. A figure stood at the crest of a nearby ridge, motionless against the starlit sky. "Got movement," Jackson said, adjusting his goggles. Davis turned to look. "Shit, who is that?" We all focused on the figure. The stance, the gear, the posture. It looked exactly like one of us. "Maybe Lewis wandered off again," I suggested, though my gut told me otherwise. Then Jackson, voice tight, whispered something that made my stomach drop. "That's me." I turned to him. "What?" "That's me," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Same gear, same rifle sling, even the way I'm standing right now. It's copying me." I looked back at the figure. It shifted slightly, mirroring Jackson's stance perfectly. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears, and then it stepped forward. But Jackson didn't. The breath caught in my throat. God, the figure had broken the pattern. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was moving on its own. Jackson tore off his goggles as if seeing it with his own eyes would make it less real. But the ridge was empty. The figure was gone. The only thing left was a whisper carried on the wind. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. "That's me." The first shot rang out before I even realized someone had fired. Then another. Gunfire crackled through the night as my squadmates panicked, their training momentarily forgotten. Muzzle flashes cut through the darkness, illuminating the ridge in staccato bursts. But the figure didn't fall. Didn't even move. Just flickered like a bad signal on a broken TV. 1 second solid and the next blurred, as if reality itself couldn't decide if it should exist. Then the echoes began. Voices, our voices, calling out from every direction. My own name spoken in my own voice, laying over itself again and again, distorting, overlapping until it was a garbled mess of sound. Davis grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." We ran. Boots pounded against the sand as we fled toward the base. The echoes chased us, growing louder, more insistent. And then something changed. The voices stopped calling our names. They started whispering things they shouldn't know. "Your dad never wanted you. Remember when you almost drowned? You never told anyone about that night, did you?" My breath hitched, my legs faltered. I clenched my teeth and forced myself forward. Behind me, someone sobbed. Someone else muttered a prayer under their breath. The lights of the base, the floodlights, suddenly appeared ahead, a beacon of salvation. Oh, we were almost there, almost safe. Then I made the mistake of looking back. Up on the ridge where the thing had been stood a new figure. Me. Every detail was perfect. Same torn sleeve, same rifle slung over the shoulder, same panicked breath in the cold night air. Except this version of me wasn't running. It was smiling. And then it whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "See you soon." Back at the base, we sat in the debriefing room, silent. No one wanted to speak first. When we finally did, the officers barely listened. "You were out there too long. Desert exhaustion plays tricks on the mind. Auditory hallucinations aren't uncommon in stressful situations." Yep, they dismissed it all. The voices, the figure on the ridge, the way the air itself had felt wrong. Even the gunfire, chalked up to jumpy nerves. The only thing they did take seriously was the missing Marine, Collins. He'd been the one separated from us, the one who claimed something had followed him in the dark, and now something was different about him. At first it was subtle, little things. hesitation before answering to his own name, stiffness in the way he walked, like someone wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. Then it got worse. He repeated things too exactly. If someone asked him a question, he'd sometimes say the exact same thing, word for word, tone for tone, days later. One night I caught him in the barracks, just standing. Not asleep, not awake, just standing in the dark, facing the corner. I called his name. He turned too slowly. "Yeah," he said after a beat too long. His voice was just a little too flat. Well, I never slept near him again. I left the Marines a few months later. Honorable discharge. I never talked about what happened. Never reached out to the guys who were there. Some things are better left buried. But sometimes on quiet nights, when the world is still, I hear it. My voice, calling to me from outside my window. "Hey, come out here." God, it sounds just like me. Well, almost. Entry 3. The Forgotten Bunker. 29 Palms is, like they say, a place where the desert decides what stays and what disappears. Out here, the sand shifts like a living thing, swallowing anything left unclaimed. Old wrecks, forgotten buildings, even people. Ask around and you'll hear stories. A truck convoy that vanished in the 50s, its rusted frame still buried somewhere beneath the dunes. A training unit that got turned around in a storm, only half of them making it back. The others lost to the desert. But there's one story that sticks more than the rest. A rumor passed between generations of Marines about a bunker. No official record of it, no coordinates, just a whispered warning. It's out there, somewhere. Well, some say it was a Cold War holdover, a classified site for experiments long since abandoned. Others claim it never existed at all. The most unsettling version, the one that made my skin crawl the first time I heard it, well, they say it was sealed shut for a reason. I never gave much thought to ghost stories. I had enough to worry about, keeping my squad in line, surviving the heat, making it through each grueling day of training without breaking. Then one night, after a brutal field exercise, I heard a group of Marines talking, their voices low and urgent. They weren't just telling the story. They were planning to find it. Now, curiosity is a dangerous thing in a place like 29 Palms. It gets under your skin, makes you ignore the little voice in your head that says this is not a good idea. And that night, I let it get the best of me. A handful of us followed our squad mates out past the training grounds, away from the base's floodlights and the distant hum of machinery. The desert felt different out there. Emptier, just wrong. Even our footsteps sounded muffled, like the sand itself was swallowing the noise. "Hey, this is it," one of the guys whispered, stopping abruptly. First, I didn't see anything special, just another patch of cracked desert floor, the same as every other godforsaken stretch of this place. But then I noticed it. The ground was hollow, and every step had a slight unnatural give, as if something was beneath us, waiting. We started digging. The sand was looser here, easier to move, as if it wanted to be cleared away. And then, the clang of metal. After a few more minutes of frantic scraping, we uncovered a rusted hatch, wide enough for a man to fit through. No markings, no insignia, but the design was old, older than it should have been. The kind of thing that didn't belong in an active military base. "What the hell is this?" someone muttered. We tried prying it open, but it wouldn't budge. Time had sealed it shut. The metal warped with age. I took a crowbar, a few well-placed kicks, and more strength than we should have wasted to finally break the seal. The moment the hatch creaked open, a wave of stale, choking air rushed up from the darkness below. It wasn't just old, it was wrong. Like something had been trapped down there for decades, waiting. A ladder disappeared into the blackness beneath us. Well, nobody wanted to say it, but nobody wanted to be the first one down. Well, we'd already come this far. And in 29 Palms, curiosity is a dangerous thing. The air inside the bunker was thick, heavy with dust, and something else, something I couldn't name. God, it smelled stale, like old paper and rust. But beneath that was an odor I didn't want to think about. We moved in single file, ducking beneath low beams, our footsteps echoing too loudly in the confined space. The walls were lined with metal cabinets, some rusted shut, others left hanging open, their contents long since raided or rotted away. The strangest thing was the paperwork. Yellow documents peeling from the walls, covered in symbols that none of us recognized. Not military markings, not any language I'd ever seen. "What the hell is all this?" someone whispered. But no one had an answer. Further in, one of the guys, Rodriguez, found a journal. The cover was brittle, the pages filled with frantic, messy handwriting. Oh, he skimmed through it, his expression shifting from amusement to unease. "This guy was losing his mind," he muttered, flipping through the pages. Well, the entries talked about an experiment, something about isolation, sensory deprivation. The words "voices in the dark" appeared over and over again, growing more erratic as the pages went on. One of the last entries caught my eye. "They told me I'd be alone. That's the whole point, right? But I'm not alone. The dark is not empty. It never was. It just needed time to wake up." God, a chill crawled up my spine. But then, before any of us could react, at the end of the hall, a door swung open. We hadn't touched it, hadn't even gone near it. And yet it stood there now, yawning open like a mouth, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The journal slipped from Rodriguez's hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. No one moved. No one breathed. The bunker wasn't empty. Something was waiting for us inside. None of us wanted to move, but the open door seemed to pull at us, like a breath inhaling slow and deep. The room beyond was pure black, darker than it should have been. Even with our flashlights cutting through the air, the shadows clung to the corners, thick and oily. Rodriguez was the first to step forward. He angled his light inside, and that's when we saw it. A shape, hunched over in the far corner. At first, it looked like a person, kneeling, head bowed, shoulders hunched like they'd been sitting there for a long, long time. "Hey," someone called. No answer. Rodriguez took another step in, and the shape moved. Not like a man shifting or standing up. It rippled as if the darkness around it wasn't just shadows, but something alive, shifting and stretching in ways that made my stomach lurch. "Hey, back up," I whispered, but no one seemed to hear me. Rodriguez lifted his rifle. "Who the hell is that?" The thing in the dark twitched, and the flashlights flickered. And in that instant, it was closer. Not walking, not crawling, it just shifted like a bad frame in an old film. A breath hitched in my throat. The air had changed. It wasn't stale anymore. It was humid, warm, like something was breathing just inches away. Rodriguez stumbled back, his light shaking. That's when I saw it. Not a person. Not an animal. No, the shape in the dark had no eyes. Just a smooth, featureless stretch of skin where a face should have been. And then it spoke. A whisper, low and rasping. Not in English, not in any language. Then the lights cut out completely. The lights were gone. Not just turned off, gone. A thick swallowing blackness pressed in from all sides, smothering every sound except for our panicked breathing. And then the voices started. Not out loud. Inside. A whisper, not in my ears, but in my head. "You were never meant to leave." I gasped, trying to shake the words out of my skull, but more followed. My own thoughts, ones I barely recognized, twisted and played back to me in something else's voice. Rodriguez screamed. Somebody else cursed, their voice breaking. Go, move. Well, we all bolted. The hallway was longer than before, stretched, warped. God, my legs felt heavy like I was wading through something thick. Every breath turned, the air had changed, too dense, too heavy, too full of something else. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Not behind us, not ahead of us, all around. Pacing, keeping stride. And then, just as we reached the ladder, someone stopped running. I turned and saw him. It was Carter. He wasn't moving. His eyes were locked on the darkness behind us, wide and glassy, mouth slightly open like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. I think it wants us to stay, he whispered. My stomach turned. He wasn't scared. He sounded hopeful. Carter, move. I grabbed his arm, but he didn't react. He just stood there trembling, staring into that impossible black void. Rodriguez cursed and yanked him back. Carter fought at first, but the moment his foot touched the ladder, he gasped like he'd just wrapped awake from a nightmare. Then we scrambled up, shoving each other through the hatch, gasping as we hit the open air. The night was silent. The desert stretched out, empty and indifferent, beneath the stars. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Carter whispered, barely loud enough to hear. It almost had me. We stumbled into the night, gasping for air like drowning men breaking the surface. Rodriguez slammed the hatch shut, the metallic clang ringing through the desert stillness. No one spoke. No one could. God, I pressed my hands to my knees, heart hammering against my ribs. My skin felt too tight, my head light. Every breath I took felt cleaner out here, like I'd been breathing something wrong down below. Then my eyes fell to my watch. 2:47 a.m. That wasn't right. We were down there for 10 minutes, Rodriguez muttered, rubbing his temples. 15 tops. I swallowed hard. My watch said we'd been gone for 3 hours. I looked around. The others were checking their own watches, their expressions shifting from confusion to something closer to fear. Then there was Carter. He stood perfectly still, staring down at his own wrist. His breathing was slow. Too slow, like he was focusing on it. Carter? I asked. He blinked, looking up at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. What? What do you remember? He frowned, his eyes flicking between us like he was trying to read our faces. I remember opening the hatch. He trailed off. Silence. Nothing else. He didn't remember the bunker, the dark, the voice, any of it. Rodriguez swore under his breath. God, we needed to get back to base. We walked fast, none of us daring to look back, though I felt it, the heavy weight of something watching, something just beyond the sand, waiting. Carter didn't speak again that night. Didn't move much either. He just sat on his bunk, eyes fixed on the door, breathing slow and steady like he was waiting for it to open. We returned at dawn. The desert was empty. No hatch, no disturbed sand, no sign that anything had ever been there. Rodriguez swore and dropped to his knees, running his hands over the ground where we knew the bunker had been. He clawed at the dirt, brushing it away in frantic sweeps. Nothing. Just packed, sun-baked earth. Bullshit, Martinez muttered. This is bullshit. Oh, we all felt it, that gnawing, twisting wrongness, like the night before had been a fever dream. But we knew it had happened. The missing time, the way Carter had changed, the thing in the dark. Except, what was in that journal? Rodriguez asked suddenly. Silence. I opened my mouth, and then closed it. I could picture the pages, the frantic scrawl, but the words blurred when I tried to bring them into focus. The bunker's layout, the symbols on the wall, the thing we saw. Oh God, slipping, fading. Martinez shook his head. I don't remember. Rodriguez clenched his jaw, looking back at the empty ground. This is some kind of mindfuck, man. Carter didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at the spot where the hatch had been, his face pale and drawn. We left. There's nothing else we could do. Over the next few weeks, we stopped talking about it. The details continued to blur, to dissolve. Felt like the whole thing had been a nightmare. A weird heat-stroke-induced hallucination. Well, for them at least. Not for me. Because every night as I drift off to sleep, I hear it. That slow, heavy creak. The sound of a door opening somewhere deep underground. And a voice, soft, patient, whispering from the dark. Come back down. Well, my dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that collection of stories. It's a subject I've loved for years, and I'm no expert on it myself, but I don't know, I just think it makes for a really good environment for a horror story, military bases and everything. So yeah, thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I'll do my best to join in the conversation. Now, I am going to England this week for a few days, haven't been for a couple of years, so I'm quite looking forward to it. But I have stories lined up for you, so there will be no break in the program as such. Anyway, waffling on here again, as I always do. Yep, hope you enjoyed that one. Back again on Wednesday night. Podcasts over on the second channel on Tuesday and Thursday this week. So it's a full week, even though I'm kind of on vacation. So, you all sleep well, and till the next time, well, sleep well. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.